Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to episode 4 of Reading the Room, a podcast in which I am joined by a bookish guest and we talk about something bookish, as you might expect. Today's guest is the lovely CJ. If you follow my channel, I'm sure you know CJ. She is one of the hotties, as you may know. Today, we are talking about depressed women moving through fiction. And this is a term that was dubbed by CJ in one of her videos, and she just did a recent video, which I'll link below, on the DWM, why she likes it, what it means. And so I wanted to talk to her about it today because I also read a lot of DWMs. So CJ, you want to define what a DWM is?
Great question. I feel like I'm still evolving the meaning of DWM. It started off as like a jokey way of me just referring to an archetype I like of characters, like a certain kind of trope that exists within literary fiction. And to me, it means a protagonist in a book who is filled with existential and philosophical ennui, and that is taking up a majority of the plot or the lack of plot. The book is structured around the interiority of their mind and their emotions are ever present.
Gotcha. So, I mean, what, for examples, I guess, what are your maybe favorite DWMs that you can, like, that come to mind, I guess?
A lot of people who watch our channels are going to be familiar with some of these titles, but like The Life of the Mind by Christine Smallwood, Luster by Raven Leilani, Fake Accounts by Lauren Euler is kind of DWM to me. Rooney, there's some DWMs in a Rooney, I would say. What else do you think? I'm only in my room where it's my TBR. So like, I don't know if any of the books in front of me are DWMs. So what do you think else would fall in that category?
I mean, one that I really liked recently was Assembly, that felt very DWM. I feel like Moshfegh, all of her books are DWM to an extent. Did you already mention her? I don't know if you just said her name. Okay. But I guess like when I was thinking about this earlier, and I think maybe DWMs fall into two subsets, and I don't know if there's any more that you can think of, but I feel like there's one subset, which is like capitalism, cli-fi, DWM, and two, there's like trauma, DWM. And I don't know if there's like any other ones you can think of that kind of fall into it. But I feel like a lot of Moshfeghs are like rooted usually in trauma, like Death in Her Hands. You learn more about the character. My Year of Rest and Relaxation, you learn later about like why the character is the way that they are, and then her being thinky in it. And then like Rooney is more of the like capitalism, cli-fi, end of the world, DWM sort of. I don't know if you agree with that framework.
I like that. And I think a third is like societal critique, which could lean into capitalism. Like I think capitalism can be absorbed by societal critique. Because I think like another ever-present topic that comes up in these books are thoughts around education and more of like philosophical frameworks at large, which I think are kind of hand in hand with societal critique.
Definitely.
So I think it's like a way of framing and looking at like the structures of our world and how they affect not only like literally the makeup of everything, but even like on a cellular like DNA level, what that trickle down looks like and what it feels like to inhabit a consciousness as you're like inheriting and moving through this kind of world and what our reality is now.
Definitely. And I think that's really well explored in like the internet novel. I feel like a lot of DWMs are very much rooted in the internet because that does take up so much of our psyche, and how we frame our personhoods is through like our facades or personality that we present online. And I think like Fake Accounts, like you said, is one that does that really, really well. Stemming from that, what do you think is not a DWM? Because in our group chat, you and I were talking like a week or two ago about like whether plot can be in a DWM or if it can't. So what do you think about like what's not included? Like let's start there.
Oh my God, a big question. Big question. I mean, I'm still like figuring out that as I continue reading more contemporary fiction. Can a DWM have a plot? I don't know. Like, I feel like that's going to be an unresolved question for a lot of this podcast. I'm like, I don't know, like, what's the context of the plot that's being explored? Because say like Fake Accounts, that plot is very referential to the current times. It's very like almost like a weird portal or mirror of the internet at large, of capitalism, of like globalism, what it means to be like an expat living in a European country, but none of it is really like moving the book along. Like I would still say the interior monologue of our main character that we follow, who I believe is an unnamed narrator. That's another check mark for if it's going to be a DWM. She's probably unnamed. I would say that's still like the glue that's holding and propelling that book forward, as opposed to like finding out what happens next. And that's probably the DWM that has the most of a plot in a traditional sense that I can think of. But it still feels DWM to me.
Definitely, because I think that book, it's laid out in like beginning and middle. Do you remember that from that book? And so I think she's like intentionally toying with like what it means to be a traditional novel and kind of breaking that open. But I think in DWMs, even when there is some sense of like plot per se, like in this book, she finds out her boyfriend is a right-wing conspiracy theorist online, and that's like the driving force. And then something else happens to him that like causes her to leave New York and go to Berlin and all of that. So like there's things that happen, but often I find in DWMs, it starts there and then it completely breaks open. Like in that book, she then goes on, like she starts dating guys, and then it's more so just like in her brain from then on, and thinking about novels, critiquing fragments, and like kind of playing with criticism and being more philosophical and not really pushing the plot like you're saying. And another example is like Death in Her Hands, when she finds the note in the woods and she thinks a murder has occurred. So you think it's going to be a traditional plot. And then I see a lot of negative reviews of the DWM saying like what the fuck, like no, there was no murder, or like nothing happened by the end, or like what. So I think it's interesting, like a primary DWM in my mind that doesn't have plot like really at all is The Life of the Mind. But there is still like that starting point of where it opens with her having a miscarriage, and then the impacts of that throughout the rest of the book. So I think maybe that's like a through line, is there's always like one or two things that the author starts at and usually doesn't resolve. Like we're not resolving our thoughts in the podcast. I mean, I think it's just, it's thinky, which I mean, it's kind of the underpinning thing there.
Yeah, like I think what you said about like being referential to like existing structures and breaking them on purpose, and kind of like twisting the inherited structure of what a book is supposed to be, which like was invented by white men most likely, you know what I mean? Like I think a DWM in the contemporary sense is playing on that margin of subversing literary structures, right? And I like don't have a huge knowledge of like what those structures are. I'm not an English student. I don't have like a lot of theoretical backing of what the components that make up fiction are, but I know when it's broken because of all of these stylistic choices all of these contemporary writers that I like reading are doing.
Definitely. Yeah, and I think one thing that I see a lot also in the DWM sphere is like autofiction, which is one example of the author intentionally playing with like literary traditional structure by inserting themselves into the narrative and making the reader question like how much of this is the author or not. And I think many DWMs are autofictional to some extent. I know one DWM that didn't work for you is Drifts by Kate Zambrino. I haven't read it, but that one seems, I think it's pure autofiction. And I remember you did not like it. So like, I guess what DWMs do you not like? And are there any through lines in them that you can maybe think of?
Yeah, let me think about that. The through line would be tone, right? And in Drifts by Kate Zambrino, for me, that tone was a self-seriousness, like a lack of levity, a complete like navel-gazing adoration of the self that was like bizarre to me to read. It was just like so self-serious in the way the character and the narrator refer to themselves and their thoughts. There wasn't any like poking holes, or like it didn't feel grounded in reality. So that's the main reason I didn't like that book. And when I think through other DWMs that I didn't like, have you read Pizza Girl?
Yes.
I also didn't enjoy Pizza Girl very much. And I think that also has to do with tone. Tone, and then that was like pretty plot driven, I would say.
Yeah.
That was like an unlikable, unreliable female narrator, but I'm not sure if it was a DWM. And I went into it thinking it was going to be a DWM.
Yeah. That's interesting you bring that one up. I read it like over a year ago, and that one was super plotty, and it feels like it kind of falls more into that trauma like subset of DWM. But the plot in that one was weird, if you remember the ending. Like it's a weird book, but to me, that book kind of suffered in its writing. It felt very simplistic, which I feel like I tend to like something that kind of pushes structure, like whereas like you're saying, in like these other books that are kind of more, I guess, reflective of the form. And Pizza Girl didn't really seem that way. I guess it's just traditionally plotty
Yeah, I
to an
think
extent.
your note about the writing being pretty plain is spot on too, because I think about that book and it was like about obsession and desire and like the psychosis of like feeling attached to someone that's like unrequited. And I think Moshfegh has a lot of those themes too. And the big differential for me is the writing. Like now that I compare those two, because I think those characters, especially like from Eileen, are pretty similar. They're on pretty similar journeys, but one is like a masterpiece and one was a flop.
Right. Right. I was going to bring up Eileen. I didn't realize that those two books were very similar, especially like the main character being attached to a woman and then having like a bad father. Moshfegh, there's just more nuance, I feel like, in Moshfegh's writing than in that book. And I don't know,
I feel
not to
like
drag Pizza
the
Girl too much,
way,
but
yeah, we love you,
it's still trash.
Motessa.
Right.
I know you're watching. I think the way Moshfegh also writes dialogue is way more elevated than the Pizza Girl author was. That was like very plain Jane, run of the mill, like clunky. I feel like dialogues are pretty hard to write well. Like shout out to Rooney. I think she really figured that out in Beautiful World, Where Are You? Some of the dialogue in that book was stunning, but going back to like themes within a DWM, what makes it, I would say almost lack of dialogue. You know what I mean? Because they are so interior and just like having a conversation with themselves in their own brains. I think that's another thing that's a red thread throughout all of that genre.
Yeah. So what do you think about dialogue generally? I think you tend to prefer books that have less dialogue in them, right?
I think I do. Yeah, it's like telling versus showing or something. Like there's something in that, like having to like sit through the minutia of characters having a conversation with each other instead of like being a complicit like ally in their own brain with them, that I feel is like kind of boring as a reader. I'm like, okay, why don't I just watch a TV show if I like want to see people in conversation with each other? You know what I mean?
Right. Definitely. And I think that also plays into maybe why we tend to steer away from plot-driven novels, like maybe like thrillers, for example. Like sometimes, like when I finish a thriller, I'm like, why didn't I just watch a 90-minute movie that plays into all the same themes? And that, like, I feel like I waste like 5 hours reading the book versus I could have just gotten a similar experience. Whereas in like a DWM or literary fiction, generally, I feel like there's so much more to explore and think about. And I feel like dialogue is one of those aspects that, I mean, I don't know, I'm kind of conflicted because like with Rooney, and one example too is Nisha Dolan in Exciting Times. I loved the dialogue in that book, but I think it's because that book is expressly looking at language generally. And so it was like necessary for her to put dialogue in to kind of show how what is the word?
Miscommunicate.
Miscommunicate, yeah, or like misguide, like through power imbalances, like misguide each other through our
Mhm.
dialogue, or don't say, yeah, miscommunicate. I don't know what I'm talking about. So yeah, I don't know. I think it depends on the circumstance and how well someone can write it. I mean, I know one author that I love who does a lot of dialogue that's quite different, I feel like, from these other examples, is Brandon Taylor. I mean, one question, can a man write a DWM, do you think?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say so. I would say it's unlikely that a white cishet man can write a DWM. I don't
Yeah.
know if I can think of any that have, but I think people who fall outside of that spectrum can.
Right. Because I think real life is a clear, like in my mind, it's a DWM, but like, do you agree with that? Maybe?
Yeah, it's a DMM. It's a depressed
Yeah, right.
man. Yeah, for
Right,
sure.
right. Yeah. Forgot to
Which I think is
specify
like,
that.
I wonder what DMMs are.
Well, I
Like
think
Mouse
maybe
Guard?
you keep stealing the thoughts out of my head. Yeah, I think that
Yeah.
like is my struggle. I think that's auto fiction, and like you talked about in your video, DWMs don't have to be fiction per se.
Mhm.
I think you mentioned Deborah Levy is one. Like you consider
Yeah.
her, yeah,
Yeah, I think like memoirists and people who are writing more autobiographical essays have a natural tendency to lean into like a DWM voice and tone because they're probably inhabiting that headspace and that personality in real life. You know what I mean? But thinking through like the canon of men who have written, and I'm not super well versed in like fiction at large, like the classics, you know what I mean? Like I'm just like not interested in knowing that backlog and that context of writing at this point in my reading journey. So it's hard for me to comment really like astutely on who the original DMM is, but I'm guessing it's like Knausgaard and like Thoreau and like other old guys. Like, who are the old guys?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think I read this book a long time ago. I completely forget it, but I think The Catcher in the Rye maybe is like a classic DMM, I guess. I'm reading one right now, actually. It's called No Longer Human, which follows a man in the 40s in Japan. And it's all about like depression and disassociation. It's very bleak. So I haven't finished it yet, so I have like no thoughts on it so far. But yeah, it's an interesting question of like what the DWM is kind of responding to maybe in literature that like we don't really know about without having the classics, I guess, background.
I like almost want like a syllabus made for us where we can like think about the DWM in context of like the greater canon, because there's also, I'm sure, so much I'm missing from like not having read Virginia Woolf, and like,
yeah,
you know, I've read Sylvia Plath, but not since I was like 16. So there's just like origins for this tracing of DWM that we're fixated on that might feel fresher or like more varied than just constantly reading about a millennial woman. Because I am at the point over the last year and a half, like getting to the point where like, okay, I'm satiated. Like I'm almost done.
Yeah, for sure. And so on that front, what do you think think's next for the DWM in terms of like, we were talking about this also yesterday, in terms of like Gen Z fiction versus millennial fiction, because DWM seems like a subgenre to me of millennial fiction generally. And do we think it'll change, or do we think there will be less DWMs or more? I mean, I think there's going to be an influx over the next 2 to 3 years, given how it seems to be like an aesthetic on like TikTok to be like, I'm depressed and I'm reading these books, like, yeah, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, it's a thing. And I feel like publishing, if they're smart, I mean, it seems like they're pushing a lot already in terms of how many are like, that came out this year. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I feel like, okay, that was a good question. I feel like, first of all, we need to think about My Year of Rest and Relaxation, because she was the blueprint. Like within the last 5 years, like that is what the trends are trying to catch up to, was the like insane hold that had and that marketing reach it had organically. Not like in the same way Beautiful World, Where Are You had that insane marketing reach, but My Year of Rest and Relaxation, which absolutely is a DWM book, got the people out there. Like, she is viral on TikTok. That is a well-read book by now. Acknowledging that, and then I'm like literally drawing on a piece of paper like a mind map web. Like, let's face it. There's acknowledging that, and then there's thinking about what comes next. And that book is interesting because it's about the early 2000s, right? Like, I would say that isn't speaking to a millennial experience, or if it was like a very small portion of elder millennials who were in their 20s when 9/11 happened. Spoiler alert, if you haven't read that book, that's the whole point of the book. Okay, so what's next none of that made sense. All of that was a non sequitur, but what's next for millennial fiction and the DWM, knowing that Gen Z is on the rise, right? Like, I think that's a great trend forecast to think about and to investigate, and for us to push on a little bit further, because you're right. Like, they are aestheticizing reading, literature, the act of reading on every social media platform, which is like its own thing that's super interesting to me in itself. What is different between Gen Z and millennials? So I would say Gen Zs grew up like device first opposed to computer first, right? So like all of their access through the world is through a phone, compared to where we have context of like a life without a phone. So I think thinking about the DWM in Gen Z will be like more online than ever, which I think can be super polarizing, and they're going to have to be smart about how they pull it off, because that could really not translate well to fiction. And I think it'll be more full of despair, but in a different way. It's not going to be like kind of how millennials are inundated with capitalism and are like, well, this is what we do. We like go to our little jobs and type on our computers. I think it'll be more like the stakes are higher because the world is accelerating at like a higher pace, and they're just going to be like writing about their experiences in real time, which already are probably going to be different than ours were.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I know in millennial fiction, one of the many discourses that have come out of Rooney's work is the way that she directly involves like text messages in her book. And I noticed like in Beautiful World, Where Are You? She talks about like messaging apps and like a ride sharing app all abstractly. Part of me wonders, this is just an idea I had. I think you're right. But I also wonder if there's a potential for Gen Z literature to be more potentially abstract or experimental. Like one book I'm thinking of right now is The Employees by Olga Ravin. I'm wondering if Gen Z will try to maybe dissociate from their present moment and think about capitalism, the end of the world, in ways that we haven't seen, or less directly than we've seen in millennial fiction, potentially. Like I wonder if there'll be a mix of those two things, or if that makes any sense what I just said.
Totally. I think it'll be like experimental art house takes on the same thematic structure, but it'll also be like whatever the marketable version of that is too, that's being popularly circulated. Weird, like their value set is pretty similar to ours, but differentiated enough that I do think it'll be a big like tone change.
Yeah, for sure. It'll be interesting to see because I feel like we looked it up yesterday whether there are any like Gen Z books out, and it seems like most of them are currently YA given their age. I'm curious to see how millennial fiction will persist in light of Gen Z fiction and what those responses will be. Of course, we have no idea what that'll be, but I'm intrigued and I'm excited.
Yeah, I mean, like the culture war between like the generation divide that's already seeping up on TikTok, like Thor Chuggy, and like millennials are like dorky and embarrassing and like say doggo and like, you know what I mean? Like we had a chance to own homes and they're not going to. Like the divide of wealth and everything is just continuing to just get bigger. So I think I can't help but think that's definitely going to be reflected in literature. Like if we think about boomers who are writing, even female boomers like Joyce Carol Oates, who even today said something transphobic, or I don't even know what she said. She said something about not respecting people's pronouns. So I'm assuming it's transphobic. I didn't even give it the time of day. But like she's a living author who's still alive and making work and is still highly read. And think about that value set being so different from ours already. I think it'll be even more rejection of like the world they inhabited and inherited and like what we gave them. So I think your thought about like experimentation, about weird shit happening is right on the money. It'll probably just continue getting weirder, or like more utopic, like even more disassociated and about entertainment, which is like what I want not to happen.
Yeah. So like by that, do you mean proliferation of like genre fiction again? Do you think like maybe steering away from literary fiction, as I think it'll always be there, but in terms of, I mean, still now like romance and thrillers are like, I think the top sellers. I don't even like think about them really, so I don't know. But I'm wondering if that might be the next step. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's super right on it. Like, especially thinking about trends of book talk. I think TikTok is like the best place to look at trend forecasting ever because it's in real time and just is the largest user set and is happening. Everything that's popular on book talk is romance and genre fiction.
Mm-hmm.
So who is the readership of that I see on TikTok and my algorithm? It's mostly Gen Z. It's people younger than me. I would say like early 20s or late teens who are consuming those books and driving sales and like making sure bookstores have book talk tables that feature what they want to read on them, you know? So we'll see how like their taste evolve as they age. I feel like we watch a couple of younger content creators, like book content creators, like Kat from Paperback Dreams. And even though our tastes don't align, we've like watched her dip in and out of more literary fiction opposed to her more like horror thriller fiction that she's reading. And even today she uploaded something about romance. So it's interesting to see like what levers are being pulled and what they're going to want to spend their like entertainment mind frame on.
I think the title of her video was like reading romance to numb the pain or something. And so I think that kind of ties into what we're talking about in terms of as the world burns. I could definitely see a lot of Gen Zers maybe wanting to read like a romance to not think about the impending doom. Whereas I think millennial fiction was at the edges of it and seeing it kind of looming a little bit farther away. So maybe that's why a lot of the books that we read are tackling these questions. Does that make sense? I don't know. Like I feel like in Gen Z, it's like an implicit thing. Like they know these things already. And so maybe they don't really want to respond to them in fiction.
Totally. Like with us, part of the reason I like reading about it is because it gives me like a framework to think through these thoughts that I feel so isolated with, like these big crushing, like heavy thoughts about the world ending, you know what I mean? And they just were born into that already. And it's not something that they have to have community with or like be explained to them because it's implicit to their daily life. I think it's exactly what you just said.
Yeah. I mean, Book Talk will be, I wonder how like in 2 or 3 years, how Book Talk will influence publishing further. I mean, I wonder what it could extend further out to being, or what I'm kind of afraid of what TikTok might do to publishing. I don't know. I feel like we're still kind of early on in Book Talk generally. I don't know.
Totally. We're super early on. We know that publishing as an industry like reacts really slowly. Like,
Right.
At least I heard Matthew Shrapa say that during your interview, and he works with that. So I'm going to tell him he's the voice of publishing. Okay. He said it must be true. So I don't think we're going to see like the response to this individual tastemaker, like curator of what to read and what's cool until like a couple of years from now.
Yeah. How do you see your reading in 2022, 2023? Like, what do you think? Do you think you're going to keep reading DWMs, or like you said, you're kind of exhausted with it at times? And I feel like I am too. I feel like I've been the most excited by, I'll give a couple examples. So the new Sheila Heti book, Pure Color, it's incredibly experimental, weird, philosophical. It contains a depressed woman in a sense, but she wrote it in this really abstract, weird way. And then the employees writing about capitalism and through like a sci-fi dystopian lens. I feel like my reading might lend itself more towards that. I mean, what do you think for yourself?
Yeah, I think I'm interested in like same themes, different framework. I have found myself wanting to read more Cli-Fi. I really enjoyed my time with whatever that book is we read. What's it called?
Something New Under the Sun?
Yes, I really enjoyed.
Yeah, that's another one.
That, and I think it has some DWM elements, but more in like an abstracted, less literal way. I'll always continue reading DWMs. I think I'm just trying to diversify the ones that I pick up. Like I'm reading a book right now, Acts of Service by Lillian Fishman. It's to be released, but it has DWM vibes, but super queer. So I'm interested in other intersects of identity and how they kind of portray this mental state and this way of moving through the world. I definitely want to like, I'm forever chasing the high of like the best DWMs we've read, right?
Yeah.
You know, a mediocre one when you find it.
Definitely. That's very true. I actually got approved for that book, by the way, on NetGalley today. And I saw, it kind of ties into what we're talking about. I saw one Goodreads review is up for it. And the reviewer said, like, I know Hot Girl Book Talk is going to freak out over this book or going to be divisive. So I'm curious to read it. But it's interesting that like Hot Girl Book Talk is like a thing that publishing seems to be responding to. I don't know.
Absolutely. I saw that same review and was thinking about that conversation we had with other friends about like, what's a clickbaity title that I could use to like get views? And I'm like, Hot Girl anything.
Yeah. It's so true. I mean, I did a TikTok recently in which I was like, I'm going to do like delete plot, add depression TikTok and like see if it does well. And it did well. And it's just so weird to me how like you can kind of know what's going to do well on there. I don't know.
Yeah, like TikTok is all about like listicles to me, right? It's like totally information that's digestible at a glance, and it's just like hyper hyper digestible, hyper fast, but like the commodification of mental illness culture and like making it an aesthetic is like a whole other thing. But I also think it's happening because it's more normalized than ever. And like probably more kids and teenagers are experiencing it on like a generational level than ever because all the shit they're dealing with. You know what I mean? I think like
Yeah.
making it like a cute, trendy thing is problematic, but it's probably rooted in like that's the way they're seeing it expressed. So
Yeah.
it's like validated to them. I can't like judge it too hard because it's like, I don't know what that person's going through.
Right. That's very true. And if it's a
Yeah.
way of, yeah, it seems like definitely a way of coping, and I don't know.
Do you have any friends with like little siblings? Like
I
one of my best friends' little sister, who I've known since she was like 7, right? I've had this best friend for like 10 years. She's like 19 or 20 now. And I've just been able to witness like it sounds like such a boomer, annoying old person thing to say, but like watching someone else move through their young, depressed teenage years and having this much access to like social media and like the glamorization of whatever this mental illness aesthetic looks like is wild. Like
yeah.
thoughts and prayers to Gen Z. My thoughts are with you. Like absolutely.
I mean, if you don't mind me asking, like what behaviors do you see? Do you have like any examples of like what they're kind of doing, or like what stuck out to you about how she like moves through her phone, I guess?
Yeah, I mean like I want to like say something without like outing who this is and make because it's
Yeah,
like
no.
really it's really niche examples that I can think of that are like so wild to me. But I think it's just like even her username would be like depressed girl 666x or whatever, you know what I mean? And like
Yeah.
something as simple as like an online handle being tied to like your mental state. Weird. I wouldn't
Weird.
say I wouldn't say millennials would do that. You know what I mean? My first username was shopping monkeys. So that is not depressed girl 666. So I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good point. Like a question of how maybe millennial fiction is in terms of its root, like rooting itself in the internet, and how like I think a lot of the books that we've liked recently is the way that we present a facade of happiness generally, and then like the DWM book explores the true depths of a person's mind. But it seems like Gen Z is like outwardly embracing mental illness, depression as like, I don't know, normalized. Maybe
Yeah,
that has
it's
something to
like,
do with it.
dude, yeah, I think that's such a good thought. It's like the baseline that they're operating from, which is valid, but like the only point that makes me like be a scared old person is them thinking that that's like something you don't need to move through. Like that, even if that
Yeah,
is your baseline, you should aim for more for yourself. You know what I mean?
definitely.
Yeah, I think that idea of facade and the layers and multiplicity that lie behind like everyone and all of these different masks and faces we have to wear is definitely tied to DWM.
Absolutely. And I mean, again, this is why this is going to be my favorite book of the year, I think, still. Fake Accounts talks about all these things in such a good way that I think is so responsive, even to like the Gen Z discussions that we're having now, in terms of like how much of the online presence of Gen Z is still rooted in facade, and like what it's trying to navigate through fiction, like the truth behind all of that, I think is what that book does so well.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that made sense, but
It does.
the book slaps.
Yeah, we should reread, honestly.
Yeah, I really want to. I think I'll get so much more out of it on the second read.
Yeah.
And having listened to like every Euler interview probably about the book, like I would like to go back to it and actually think about this more. But
Is Franzen a DMM?
no, another
Okay.
book that I love. So Franzen, that one's just like pure family saga,
Mm.
which like traditional novel in a sense. And I love that too. Like I wonder if I'm actually like steering away from TWM. Oh, okay, thank God you asked that too. One thing that I've thought about in my love for DWM is I'm not a DWM, and I wonder why I'm so drawn to the genre. I feel like I don't know if is it problematic to try to root it in the fact that I'm queer. That I don't know. I wonder why that is.
I don't think so. And like, I can't speak to your experience or on behalf of all queer people, obviously, but like, I would say men who are not heterosexual are more in touch hopefully with empathetic modes of thinking and moving than we think. Not, I don't want that to be like super misandry vibes, but there is a part of being in your interiority more and like in your self dialogue with being a queer person that I think makes that connection strong.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I'm an only child, so I've always been a little like dark queer kid in my room, like reading. And so I think it naturally is what I like to ponder. I don't know.
We didn't even talk about only child syndrome. Like that's probably a huge thing in
Yeah.
DWMs.
Yeah, that's true.
If you're an only child and you're reading a DWM, drop an emoji in the chat.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, I think it's just like the validation that you're experiencing the world without input from anyone else.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like reflecting that you're alive in your own brain.
Yeah. And I think without these books, like I didn't really, it sounds so depressing. Like I had friends, but like I didn't have, it's like company in the deep, dark shit that you're experiencing. Because again, like I think these novels really strip away the facade, even in like even in friendships, and really like you can actually, like, no judgment, you can't really judge, the person's not real. So like, you know what I mean? It's an easy way of moving through your own emotions and like talking to someone in your head without actually like laying bare the despair in you. I don't know. That's kind of dark, but I think there's some truth there.
Yeah, and I feel like there's also something about like the emotional exchange between reader and book being less of like a struggle or like a barrier to connection than it is with human beings, which is obvious.
Yeah.
Like I think a lot of readers are like kind of, you know, introverted thinky nerds, but that's just like hyped up to another level with the DWM.
Yeah, and that also makes me wonder, like with the aesthetic social media book trend, like how that will play into Gen Z literature in terms of it being like this thing of connection with other people, or like, I don't know, a front.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Something I've been thinking about a lot, and I don't know if it's because I'm like more in the book sphere online than ever with creating my own content, or it's just like an actual trend that's happening. Like I feel like a lot of influencer culture used to be about beauty, right? Like your physical body, your fashion sense, like your style, the way you do your makeup, like really hard to achieve ideals of something that's very much so about the surface. And I feel like book culture and like this aestheticization of what it means to be a reader and this like merging of this existing influencer TikTok culture with this new product that's for sale, but it's about your brain and your thoughts around it, is really interesting and like something I'm still trying to unpack and like make sure I'm not complicit in, because there are a lot of like influencers, micro influencers, creators in the book sphere who are, I would say, not creating content that is what do I want to say here? Not creating content that's like not original, but like thoughtful. Like it is just using the same formulaic experience of like posting a new skincare brand online, but it's a book. It's like, love this, 5 stars, and it just doesn't say anything.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it kind of scares me. I mean, like, what's end game? You know what I mean? For like, for book talk and stuff. Like, what is it gonna like? I'm nervous about what will be published, or maybe I shouldn't be nervous, like you're saying, in terms of Gen Z kind of having a better, more diverse understanding of these issues. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it could go. Oh my god, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. It's a big questions, but
yeah, it's a big question, and like, especially since we're not. You're not Gen Z, are you?
no,
No, I mean,
I
we're
am
not
millennial.
Gen Z. Like we don't have the same context as they do. I feel like some of it is like scam culture and like getting your bag while you can and like finessing, again, these like oppressive structures that you were born into.
Yeah.
Like even if you don't have money to get lip filler, even if you don't have money to like buy the latest whatever is in style and is cool, like you could still flex by taking a cute picture of a book, and like the inherent intellectual merit that is like associated with reading is like a whole other thing, trying to flex and curate and be an influencer of.
Yeah.
It's super weird.
It's really weird. And I feel like personally, I've had some struggles with this because, like, I'll be kind of honest, like with being on BookTube, I don't know if maybe this is a good point to kind of end on. Like, I'm curious as to how BookTube and being online with your bookishness, how has that impacted your thoughts on reading or just like your mental health in approaching book reading? Has it impacted it in a negative or positive way, would you say, or both?
I feel like it's been mostly positive because I feel like I treat TikTok like a game. Like TikTok is totally gamified to me. Like I said before, it's listicle driven. So like all of my content there, if you go there, is like kind of cursed and cringy. And like that's on purpose because it's literally like a cash grab money thing to me. And I think it'll be like fun to be able to get 10,000 followers on a platform where I've literally contributed nothing. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So it's like I'm self-aware enough to understand that like that's the pop-in social media platform to get your cash grab and notoriety to ensure I can keep getting free books. Okay.
Yeah.
And like that's why I'm in this thing, is to like find community, get better recommendations, be in conversation with readers, which I don't have in my real life at all. And also to help sustain my book buying habit. Like if I can have a relationship with a publishing house that's beneficial for both of us, literally why not? Like I know
Right.
for a fact that, again, these like micro influencer, like hand to buyer recommendations, like I've sold so many copies of The Deeper the Water, The Uglier the Fish. Like I know that for a fact. The same with like Blueberries and Rebecca and like you and Moshfegh. We do have a gradual buildup of merit and exchange that's happening with these publishing houses, which I don't think we should discount, but I also don't think they should be totally like beholden to it by any means. Like we're just readers at the end of the day.
Right. Yeah, and that's been a hard balance for me lately. Like I've been trying to find the balance between like I've always had this like kind of perfectionist streak where like I want to be the best reviewer I can be, or I want to like, not even that I want to have a huge like booktube presence per se. Like I just never want my online presence with books to veer into like me constantly being dissatisfied with like my follower count or like who I'm reaching. Like, and I feel like sometimes I get nervous about like when I'm reviewing a book and I don't really have sure thoughts on it, or I'm like I don't feel like I review it with enough nuance. Like I kind of beat myself up over it, but I'm like for what? I don't know. It's weird, and I've been trying to navigate that lately.
Well, I think that's like another symptom of capitalism, right? Is like your desire to find merit and like productivity in a hobby, which is like what this is at the end of the day. Like it's a hobby and it has a great benefit, which is friends and free books. So
Right.
like keeping that as my ethos that I operate from has been super beneficial to me. And when I feel it flaring up where I'm like, let's girl boss this shit, like let's pump the content and like really try to make money. I'm just like, CJ, you're almost 30 years old, girl. Like, no, it's not happening for
Yeah.
you. And like that's happening for the Gen Zers and the TikTokers who are like able to sustain like not getting a job off of that. And it's like, congrats, bro. But I think we're in like that sweet spot of we can see the facade, we can
Right.
like inhabit it to an extent, but also reject it, which like is the DWM.
Yeah, absolutely. What a perfect way to bring it all together.
Yeah, not
Um,
planned, not scripted. We're just that deep.
right. Well, I guess we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for joining me and discussing this. I'm glad that we finally like had a CJ collab. Also, I'm going to see you in like 2 days, 3 days,
Yeah.
2 days. So you'll have more CJAY content coming soon. I'm very excited. If you have any thoughts on DWMs, put them in the comments below. What else is there to say, CJ? Am I missing anything?
Is influencer culture going to kill us all? What's the difference between Gen Z and millennials? Let us know. Is TikTok evil?
Right. Drop the T in the comments, please.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, CJ. And I'll catch you in the next one.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.